Good day, all. In this talk, I shall examine Japanese superheroes. Currently, the world's biggest comics producer is not the US, but Japan. Japan differs from the other countries we've looked at in that, although it has in the past been a military superpower, its modern superheroes have emerged only after Japan was defeated in World War II and had most of its military dismantled. Instead, Japan has emerged as an economic superpower, one of the richest and most productive of all industrial nations. Its exports have conquered the world rather than its army. But this break in military tradition has meant that modern Japanese superheroes have mostly not grown out of war heroes. This, in turn, means that Japan's superhero subculture is nowhere near as overwhelmingly male as North America's. On the contrary, the audience for Japan's superheroes has a roughly even gender split. Japanese comics are referred to as manga, which translates as whimsical pictures. They use a specific artistic style, which was originally developed in Japan in the 12th century and which became popular in the 19th century. The first manga magazines appeared in the 1870s, and the first superhero manga appeared in the 1950s. When this artistic style is transferred to TV or movies, it is referred to as anime. Manga has grown steadily in popularity. By the late 1990s, over 2 billion manga books and magazines were being sold annually in Japan. In the late 2010s, manga began to outsell US comics, both globally and even in the US. By 2017, manga distributor Viz Media was the largest publisher of graphic novels and comic books in the US, with a 23% share of the market. This popularity is partly due to the rise of web manga, or manga released digitally over the internet. Some of this material is free, but in 2020, sales from web manga surpassed those of print manga. While US comics are also available over the internet, the global marketing of manga has been much more successful in this regard. The father of superhero manga was Osamu Tezuka. In 1951, he created a character that goes by various names. In Japanese, the comic was called Tetsuwan Atomu. This literally translates as Iron Arm Atom, but it is more commonly translated as Mighty Atom, and the character's name is just Atom. However, when NBC brought the series to the US in 1963, US Comics already had a character called the Atom, so their executives changed the comic to Astro Boy and his name to Astro, which they thought sounded, quote, exciting and futuristic. The problem with this name change is that it is misleading. Calling him Astro Boy makes him sound like a boy from the stars, and he is neither. He's from Japan, and although he looks like a boy, he's not a boy. He's a humanoid robot or android. Also, he appeared just 7 years after atomic bombs were dropped on Japan at Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end World War II. And Tezuka has said that he deliberately named his creation Atom to show that atomic power could now be used for peaceful purposes, since Atom is powered by an atomic reactor in his chest. So he is, literally, Iron Arm Atom. He has iron arms and an atomic heart. However, From now on, I shall refer to him as Astro and to the comic or show as Astro Boy. Tezuka was well aware that Japan had lost World War II because the US had superior science and technology. He created Astro Boy to show that Japan's future depended on its developing high technology like robots. This was very far-seeing of him, especially since Japan in 1951 was still very backward technologically, and since the first industrial robot was not invented until 1954 in the US. But in the 60s, Japan became the world leader in robotics, and it still is. By 1995, there were over 700,000 industrial robots in the world, and over 500,000 of those were in Japan. In practice, it is robots that have made Japanese an economic and industrial superpower. In a very real sense, robots are the superheroes that have saved Japan. So it is not surprising that their first superhero was a robot. Astro has become a national symbol of this new high-tech Japan. He has directly inspired a generation of Japanese roboticists. It is no coincidence that Japan is the country that is closest to creating a real-life Astro, such as Asimo, a humanoid robot built by Honda in the year 2000. However, while robots have brought Japan prosperity, they have also taken a lot of jobs away from people, which means that not everybody likes robots. Astro Boy consciously explores this love-hate relationship between man and machine, between human and robot. In the stories, Astro was built by the Japanese Minister of Science to replace his dead son, a kind of modern Pinocchio. But once he realized that no robot could actually replace his son, he sold Astro to the circus, quit his job, and became a mad scientist. But then, the new Minister of Science saw Astro and rescued him and turned him into a superhero, working for the government, fighting against crime and for peace. Astro Boy was originally set in the year 2003, and it portrayed a society which had lots of robots, but treated them like slaves. Astro is much more advanced than most other robots, but he shows that they have the potential to think and act like humans, and so should have the same rights as humans. This is a theme that has become quite widely used in science fiction. Data, on Star Trek, lives in a future society which has granted androids like him human rights. Astro still has to fight for them. This is a theme which obviously draws parallels between robots and human slaves. When the Europeans enslaved the peoples of Africa and Latin America by the millions, they justified it by denying their humanity, by claiming that they were savages who are not fully human like white people. Similarly, whenever a group is being persecuted and discriminated against, their persecutors often claim that they are not fully human, like Jews or queers. Here, there's a parallel between the treatment of robots in Astro Boy and mutants in the X-Men. The other interesting thing about Astro's origin story is that both his creator and his savior are not just scientists, which is to be expected, but government ministers. This is something that we just do not see with US superheroes. The basic US ideology is business good, government bad. So, we see big businessmen like Bruce Wayne and Tony Stark becoming superheroes and saving people. But when the government tries to create superheroes, as with the Department K that created Wolverine and Deadpool, they are portrayed as evil. This reflects the greater role played by the Japanese government in rebuilding Japan and Japanese industry after World War II. In the US, private corporations led the way. In Japan, there was much more of an equal partnership between state and capital, which Astro Boy demonstrates. This is also why Astro spends less time fighting crime than fighting for the more political goal of peace, which is what a defeated post-war Japan wanted above all. Apart from being a robot, Astro is a direct copy of Superman. He has virtually the same superpowers: super strength, flight, invulnerability, super hearing, super intelligence, even heat vision. Like Superman, he is theoretically a wise man, but in practice is shown more as a strong man. The one big difference between them is that Astro has a retractable machine gun built into his hip, something that both marks him as a machine rather than a human, and makes him more ready to use violence than Superman. This is due to a cultural difference between Japan and North America. In Japan, there is less of a distinction drawn between children's TV shows and adult TV shows, and children are generally allowed to watch adult shows, so they're more exposed to media, sex, and violence. So for them, Astro using a machine gun was not a big deal. And in Japan, Astro Boy, as with most manga, was always intended for an audience of both children and adults. As manga in general has evolved, it has always had more sex and violence than most US comics. Japan's experience totally contradicts the US scare campaigns that we've looked at in earlier talks, which claim that exposing children to media violence makes them more violent in the real world. Japanese kids see a lot more media violence than US kids, yet Japan is much less violent than the US. But when NBC bought the show for US distribution, they immediately toned down the violence. Astro very rarely used his machine gun, he never killed anybody, and a lot of other violence was taken out, as well as all nudity, drugs, religion, and even black characters and references to Japan. Astro Boy was literally sanitized and whitewashed for the American public. Yet even so, some US viewers complained that Astro Boy was too violent for their children. But most viewers accepted Astro, largely because of his look. Tezuka has said that Astro's look was inspired less by Superman himself than by a Superman parody, Mighty Mouse. Mighty Mouse is a furry animal, Superman. Astro is a doll-like Superman. Looking like a boy doll allows him to be cute and cuddly, even though he occasionally shoots people. The Astro Boy manga was made into a TV anime series in 1963. It ran in Japan until 1966 and was a smash hit, not only in Japan and the US, but globally. It introduced the world to the anime style. New Astro Boy TV series were made in the 1980s and again in 2003 to 4. Full-length motion pictures were made in 1964 and 2009. For Astro's birthday of 7th April 2003, massive events, parades, and ceremonies were held all over Japan. Astro has become an enduring part of Japanese culture, and its creator, Osamu Tezuka, is often referred to as the god of manga. Astro's popularity has led to many robot rip-offs of him. Indeed, he originated what has become known as the mecha subgenre in manga, which has included, among others, the robot Iron Man Tetsujin in the 60s, the android girl Arara-chan and the robot cat Doraemon in the 70s, Transformers in the 80s, made into a series of movies in the 2000s, and the cyborg Major Kusanagi in Ghost in the Shell in the 90s, made into a movie in 2017 starring Scarlett Johansson. In a way, Ghost in the Shell brings us full circle back to Astro, because even though it's about a female cyborg rather than a robot boy, they both work for a Japanese government minister. Astro worked for the Minister of Science, and the Major is part of a fictional counter-terrorism unit that reports directly to the Minister for Internal Affairs. So today, we still see the government portrayed more positively in Japanese manga than in US superhero comics. The first major non-mechanical superhero to appear in Japan was Son Goku, the hero of Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball debuted in 1984 as manga and in 1986 as an anime TV series. It has spawned many sequels: Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Z Kai, and Dragon Ball Super. I shall just refer to them all collectively as Dragon Ball. It's been made into 19 animated movies, as well as video games, card games, and action figures. It has sold over 240 million copies worldwide, making it the second best-selling manga series of all time. It updates the old Oriental tradition of fantasy folk tales filled with samurai and dragons, which has been the basic inspiration for fantasy manga. It is based on the 16th century Chinese novel Journey to the West, which is considered to be one of the 4 great classical novels of Chinese literature. The original novel is based on the true story of a Buddhist monk who traveled west from China to India to obtain some sacred Buddhist texts, but adds fantasy elements like a dragon prince. Dragon Ball turned this into the story of a martial artist who searches the world for the 7 orbs known as the Dragon Balls, which summon a wish-granting dragon when gathered together. Creator Akira Toriyama has said that he wanted to add a little kung fu to the original, and that in this he was inspired by Jackie Chan. So Son Goku is basically Jackie Chan superhero. This means that the update turned the hero from a wise man, a monk, into a strong man, a super martial artist. The 90s saw the rise of Japan's first and greatest superheroine, Sailor Moon. She is Japan's equivalent of Wonder Woman, except that she was wholly created by a woman, Naoko Takeuchi. Sailor Moon debuted in manga in 91, as a TV anime series in 92, and in North American TV in 95. She is the most prominent example of another manga subgenre which goes back to the 60s. This is the women's fantasy genre, commonly termed the magical girl genre. Magical girl is, of course, just an updated way of saying witch. The genre began in 1966 with a manga called Little Witch Sally, loosely based on the US TV series Bewitched. In 1971, Tezuka himself contributed to it with Marvelous Melmo, about a 10-year-old girl who takes magic pills to temporarily turn herself into an adult. And 1996 saw the debut of Card Captor Sakura, who has magical playing cards. Sailor Moon was a teenage schoolgirl in Tokyo who met a magical talking black cat named Luna, who gave her a magic brooch that turned her into the leader of a team of sailor scouts who had to save the world from the forces of evil. This means that she not only has a magic talisman which gives her magic powers, she even has a black cat, the traditional witch's familiar. So she is very much in the ancient tradition of the magic woman or witch. But as a schoolgirl, she is a non-threatening witch. And as a teenager, she's sometimes very feminine and giggly around boys, especially her love interest, the male superhero Tuxedo Mask. However, in action, she saves him more often than he saves her, and she and other strong female characters take the lead in the show. Like Wonder Woman, she is generally seen as an empowering figure for young women, not just in Japan, but also in North America. But the most successful manga series of all time is relatively recent and relatively unknown in North America. It is called One Piece, published weekly in Japan since 1997. As of 2017, it has sold over 430 million copies worldwide, making it not only by far the best-selling manga series in history, but also setting a Guinness World Record for, quote, the most copies published for the same comic book series by a single author, namely Eiichiro Oda. It has also been an anime TV series since 1999 and has been made into 13 animated movies, as well as video games, novels, card games, and even a theme park which opened in Tokyo in 2015. It is set on another planet and follows the adventures of, I kid you not, Monkey D. Luffy, a boy who eats a piece of devil fruit which gives his body the properties of rubber. With his crew of pirates, he searches the world looking for the ultimate treasure, which is known as One Piece, and possession of which will make him the next pirate king. This is a variation on the basic Dragon Ball plot, and the rubber body superpower is of course a copy of Plastic Man and Mr. Fantastic. Like Plastic Man, One Piece is an action comedy comic, where the adventures are primarily played for laughs. Indeed, manga in general blends action with comedy much more than North American superhero comics. North American superhero comics are mostly dramatic action comics, with a separate minority that are clearly labeled as parodies or otherwise humorous. But in Japan, Mainstream manga is both action and comedy. All of the manga we've examined from Astro Boy on frequently interrupt the action with slapstick comedy and bad jokes. Providing both action and comedy is apparently one of the secrets to manga success. It broadens the appeal and expands the audience. Not only that, but manga overall has a much broader subject matter than North American comics. North American comics are predominantly about superheroes. But manga covers all literary genres. Romance, crime, sports, fantasy, even porn. Superheroes are just one part of the Mangaverse. But they're the part that we're interested in here. That concludes what I have to say on Japanese superheroes. A transcript of this talk is attached if you're interested. Good day all.